Here's the thing, if you're in university right now, then you're most likely struggling with two major things. First of all, the overwhelming amount of all the things that you have to study in all these courses and all the things that you have to memorize and actually get in your head. And second, you probably gotta take mandatory classes where you have like zero interest in. Looking at you, art history. Alright, hey guys, and if you're new on this channel, my name is Michael and here I make videos about like studying, productivity and digital minimalism. And I can tell you one thing for sure, I'm not a genius student, but I just got tired of pulling all-nighters and feeling unprepared for my classes all the time. And over the years in university, I stumbled upon three principles that really much saved my ass and changed the game absolutely for me. So in this video, I actually want to show you these three principles that made my university life so much easier and cut my studying time in half. The first principle is to decode your blind spots when it comes to studying and deciding or actually realizing what you know and what you do not know. So, because one of the most common mistakes is that many people start to study for a subject and they just go straight into it. Like they open the textbook, they open like the online materials that they have, and they just start to study whatever comes across of them. And the thing is, this is like a perfect recipe for disaster, and especially this is a perfect recipe for overwhelm, because what happens is reality hits and you're confronted with so many things that you actually do not understand, but you have no clue whatsoever what they're even talking about. Why the hell would I need that many watermelons? One of the best things that you can actually do is to decode your blind spots, to actually understand what you do not understand. And this will just help you to study so much faster, so much easier, and without that much stress and overwhelming linked to it. And what I recommend you to do is at the start of the semester, or whenever you start to study for a course or for an exam, for example, take the curriculum that your teacher or your professor actually provides with the course and take an overview over the whole material, over everything that you're going to go through in the semester, for example, and look at every topic, at every chapter, at everything that you're going to do in the semester, and think about whether you have some clue or not, whether you have some idea what this is actually about, whether you have any kind of information that is actually linked to that in your brain, and most importantly, realize where all the areas, where all the blind spots are, where you have no information actually linked to that whatsoever, and have absolutely no idea what they are talking about. Because this will actually help you tremendously in two ways. First of all, it is so much easier to actually understand something and to learn something, and especially to learn it way faster and easier when you just have the slightest clue what it's about, or have any information in your brain that kind of resembles what you're studying at the moment. And this works for almost every course you could study, for every subject that you could study. But I take language, for example. So imagine that you're picking up a new language, and if you watch this in English, then I guess that you can speak English. And the fact that you already speak English makes it so much easier for you to pick another language that is actually a Germanic language. So, okay, you could doubt that English is not that much of a Germanic language because of all the Romans influence, but other topic for another day. English is in the same category of, for example, German or Dutch, for example, which makes it so much easier for you to, for example, pick up Dutch. Goedendag, ik wil een video maken. It is so much easier to understand this because when you're in the same language family, for example, Germanic languages or also Romance languages, this means that many words are like pretty similar to the other ones. It means like, for example, to make is in Dutch, I assume, maken, and in German it's machen. And it is not that far off actually, and it's way easier for you to understand. Compare this to languages that are not in the Germanic language family like English, to, for example, Romance languages, French, faire, Spanish, hacer, or even Slavic languages like Russian, делать. These words do not resemble whatsoever the English one, which makes it so much harder for this information to actually stick in your brain. And when you then go through the material and you know what you already know, you can link the new information that you're about to study to the things that you already know. And part two of this means that if you already know what you know and have clearly understood what you do not understand, then you have a perfect game plan to actually what you should tackle step by step to actually get towards your goal of passing that exam or finishing that course or just really much mastering that subject. Because many people fall into the trap of just starting with whatever they see. They just like open the textbook and they like then get really frustrated, or when they're, for example, attending the lecture, they're like really frustrated and anxious once they realize I don't understand shit. And then they start to immediately think that, oh man, I'm like not good enough for this. I mean, like I can't even keep up with the pace and what the professor is saying, and what the hell are these Greek symbols? This heavily distorts the way of how you actually perceive how much you actually are capable of, how much you can actually understand about this, and it is just a recipe for disaster. But if you clearly know what you do not know, then you can one by one tackle the things that you do not know, and you know that by understanding each little subject about this, you will get one step closer to actually passing that exam, understand the subject in total, and the more you understand, the more space you actually have to link the information bits in your brain to, because all of these things are just how on the neuroscience basis our brains do actually work. Our brains are like these clusters with many neurons. That means like neural cells that store the information in it. And how learning actually works is that our brain makes new neural connections to other things that we already know. Learning means creating neural connections in your brain, and it's so much easier to link stuff together than to create new neural connections in a blank void or so. It's the same as doing a puzzle, for example. I would assume that only a fraction of people would start in the middle, probably masochists or so, and most people would kind of start at the edges and like do and find the edges of the puzzle, and then slowly but surely fill in all the gaps between it, which makes completing the puzzle way easier. And that's how you have to think about your brain. Find the edges, fill in the spots in the middle, and you're good to go. Hi there, what's good?
Hey there, how's it going?
Can you just randomly pick one word, like very complex subject that I now have to explain to someone that is 6 years old?
Sure, how about photosynthesis?
You see this thing right here. Plants also want to eat, because after a long day and filming lots of videos, I get hungry as well. But this plant here is standing here all the time and it's looking cool, and it also wants to eat at a certain point of the day. But the problem is it doesn't have a stomach, nor teeth, nor can it eat. Photosynthesis, or so. Albert Einstein supposedly said, if you cannot explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And who knows whether he said it or not, but there's some truth behind that. And this is called the Feynman Technique. Because Richard Feynman was known to not be like other professors at his time and teach the stuff he wanted to teach completely different in a really intuitive way. And if you use the Feynman Technique, then your studying will just be 10x faster. Because in order to really understand something, you should actually teach it. Teaching just makes your brain think so much about the stuff you actually want to teach. It makes you think so deeply about the content, about the connections between different topics in your field, about how everything is actually working together, what the reasons are, what potential outcomes are. And teaching something, and especially preparing to teach something, like for example holding a presentation in front of class, will just make the knowledge so much stick in your head. And this is what is called the Feynman Technique. And if you want to speed up your learning, teach it to others. Because it often happens, like for example, you're sitting in class and you're watching the professor or the teacher doing whatever he or she does at the blackboard, and they're explaining whatever science stuff or whatnot that you have to understand for the course, and you sit there like, yeah, I get that. But the thing is, if you were asked to actually explain yourself what it's actually all about, how it all works together, most people are really much clueless. The problem is that when we especially just go over like material, when you have a document and we just read through it, then we kind of can follow what the point is and why they're doing what they're doing. And we kind of have a feeling of the reasoning behind that. But if we were actually asked how it works, why it works, we're clueless. Using the Feynman Technique is such a pro move because it will actually stop you from using like the fancy language that you find in books. All the technical terms that they use in books, not that they are bad, but the problem is that we kind of cling to these words and we stick to like these sciencey Latin-based words, and they sound also professional and academical, but reality is that it often happens that we don't understand the reasoning, why things happen, why this is, what the connections between things are. Try to explain the topic that you're studying to, for example, a 10-year-old. And you see that it can get really tricky because once we actually try to teach something to a 10-year-old, we have to scrape all that fancy speech that we use in the textbooks. We have to stop using all these technical terms which tricked us into thinking that we actually understood the topic, but they force us to choose a simpler language to actually describe the complex situation, how everything works together. This is actually the test if you understand what it's all about. If you easily can just explain something, like more or less I did with the plant thing here, to a 10-year-old. If you just easily can swap out the language, swap out the words, and just easily explain it to a 10-year-old, then you've fully understood the topic. But if you realize that once you drop the fancy speech, once you drop the technical speech, that it's really hard and you have a hard time to actually explain it to the 10-year-old, then chances are that you do not fully understand the topic. All right, number 3, and this is personal. When I was in primary school, I was like kind of an annoying kid. And I often was loud and doing stuff that was not related to class. I was talking to others, and I have this little booklet that my teacher back then compiled about my behavior. It sounds like I had a huge problem. It's not that bad, but back then she wrote, so I got to translate it from German somehow. Michael is fully immersed in class and is so engaged and so interested about what's actually being taught, as long as he finds it interesting. Once he's not interested, he disturbs class and is loud. It's kind of embarrassing to share this, but that's true. As a child, and also now I don't disturb other people, I'm just silently bored. When something is interesting to me, I just absorb it. There are moments when I read whole Wikipedia articles and I swear I can just memorize everything. It's just the weirdest nerd stuff that I read on Wikipedia, but if it's interesting, I will memorize everything. And this personal story aside, number 3 is the rabbit hole technique, I call it. Each one of us, sometime or the other, stumbles upon a rabbit hole on the internet, and there's something that we're interested in. And we, for example, as I said right now, we click on a Wikipedia article or we click on a website or whatever it is on the internet. Let's say you're really much interested in London, for example. Then you go, for example, on the Wikipedia article and you read something about London, and you read then something about the typical double-decker red buses that they have in London. And then you go on the Wikipedia article of the bus manufacturer and you see oh, in Berlin they drive these buses as well. And then half an hour later you read something about the Berlin public transport system, and then you go down that rabbit hole and read about how this is all linked to the Napoleonic Wars in Europe at the time. And 1 hour later, you're just so deep into the rabbit hole and you've been reading about all this stuff and it was kind of so interesting and you were so curious, but 1 hour later, what did you do all the time? Probably happens to each one of us. When we're really interested in something, we're really much immersed in it. We're really much engaged in it mentally. It's so easy to get in that flow state, and it's just because you're curious. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to memorize all this information or look it up, but we're interested in it and we click on the information and we just read through it because we're curious. Point here is that interest sparks learning. And if you're not interested in something, best example, maths in school, because many people is simply a fact not interested in maths whatsoever, and they think about why the hell would I need this in my everyday life? And especially this question, why would I need this in my life, sparks disinterest and actually makes you not want to learn this stuff. Because if something is not useful, after all, we are creatures by evolution, and if something is not useful to us, we drop it because it just means a waste of resources, for example. And this is also the reason why it's so easy to remember stuff that is interesting to you, because it kind of seems to our brain that we might need that later on. This is why we instantly actually absorb this. And the rabbit hole technique is actually all about that. It means, one more time, look at the curriculum or whatever you have to study in this course, in the semester, whatever. Look at the whole material that you have in front of you. Look at each chapter, at each topic, and what it's actually all about, and think about whether there is at least one tiny thing that you think is interesting about all of this. Is there anything that kind of sparks a little bit of interest, or that is kind of somehow related to something that is interesting to you? Or is there something that kind of seems useful, or that you have seen before, or where you know that someone you know is interested in? There's again any kind of neural connection that already exists exists in your brain, or at best, proper interest that exists in your brain, it is so much easier to actually start with that. Because if it's interesting to you, you will absorb it like a sponge. It doesn't have to be a proper interest, because I understand that it can be really hard, and I know it can be really hard because much stuff is simply not interesting. What I often do is that I kind of still try to force some interest, whereas I would just like Google the topic and just like watch some documentary, or like just read a newspaper article about this, or just like get any real use scenario and understand what people are actually doing with this in the real life, so that it's not like this dry material that I read in a textbook or so that I have to like memorize and forget after that, but that I really much understand how this impacts like the world in real life. Once I'm able to spark interest in it, it is just like a cheat code, because you memorize it immediately. Okay, and if you watched this far, then the secret sauce, point 4, or like rather the bonus point, these 3 points up to now, they work like wonders. They're like really fantastic. I can wholeheartedly recommend to do that. Understand what you know, what you don't know, use the Feynman technique and explain it to a 10-year-old, and also find interest in the material in some way or the other. But learning lives off neural connections, and your brain to actually grow more neurons in your brain, and to link and to wire together what fires together wires together, and to like create this cluster in your brain of information. And this whole process, it takes time. It is very, very hard to get a firm grip of a subject in just like one day or so. It is very hard to understand the whole complexity of a subject just like that, because it's merely impossible just like that. It is like really hard. And if you're short in time, then these 3 tips will like, I promise you, save your ass, because they saved my ass so many times in my life. But if you have time left, for example, at the beginning of a semester or a course, then the secret sauce is lots of time and lots of repetition. Because our brain just works like that. This is called spaced repetition. The more you actually, after a while of not engaging in information, engage in it again. For example, you read about something yesterday, you do it today again. You did it today, you do it in 3 days again. You did it in 3 days, you do it in a week after that again. After the week, you do it after a month, after 3 months, and so on. This is called spaced repetition. And what happens here is that each time where you successfully recalled the information, and you were able to retrieve all the information that you actually studied yesterday, again today, without looking it up, these neural connections that grow in your brain actually, just as a muscle would do, get stronger and bigger, and they like kind of really much grow together. It's like really like that. The more repetition you get in, and the more time you actually have to let these neural connections grow, the stronger your neural web of information you had will get, the more sound and firm your grasp of a subject will actually be. Which means if you start early on in a semester and regularly practice something, regularly engage in it, recall the information you studied a while ago, then you will have such a razor sharp and clear grasp of the subject. You will really much master it, which is an awesome feeling. These 3 first principles, they work like wonders, but if you just add some time and repetition, thing is, you want to avoid the beginner's mistakes that many people just do when they go about studying. Because I understand it is hard when you, for example, get first into university or college, and to figure all these things out, to actually as well study by yourself. And it's just so hard to get your shit together. I feel you. And to actually learn how you learn is one of the best skills that you can actually acquire. And if you're interested in that, then I made this video right here, which is called How I Study Smarter and Not Harder, where I talk about and explain this book right here by Barbara Oakley, who is a world-renowned expert in how to actually study faster and understand the things that you want to study way better. So make sure to watch this video right here. And besides that, thank you as always so much for watching, and see you next time. Bye-bye.